Hello there, my name's Tim Walter. I'm a house healer and an alternative life coach. I'm interested in helping people reach a new level of well-being through a fundamental shift of perception on their lives. To do that, we look at meditation, mindfulness, and dowsing. Now, dowsing is the easiest and most accessible way to start changing the way we see the world. Recently, I talked with my good friend Gary Vasey about just how using dowsing to explore the earth energy in your own home can really help you de-stress in what some regard as these difficult times.
What sorts of things can people engage in to help with the stress and the confusion and all of the other stuff that's going on?
You're certainly talking to the right person about stress. I've been working on trying to reduce and eradicate stress as much as possible from my life for probably about the last 50 years. It's been going pretty well recently, but not so much for the first 30 or so years. And really, what I would say, and I don't think it'll be any surprise to people listening to the podcast, is that to simply step back from what you see in any form of media, any way it comes to you. That's one thing. Just step back from it and feel yourself in a kind of a meditative way, actually detach from that input coming into your life. Because quite frankly, it's just playtime and pantomime. Most media, in fact, I would say all media, is designed to grab your attention and to influence the way that you feel. And that includes what you and I do, Gary, as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's the whole point. What we're trying to do is to help people get to a different level of well-being. Whereas if we look at some of the more mainstream channels, I mean channels of broadcast, channels of communication from any material platform, news, web, whatever it be, they are all designed to impart a specific message that has been very carefully drawn up and targeted for a specific purpose. And a lot of what we perceive as conspiracy theorist activity and misinformation, all the rest of this, it actually stems from the pure fact that all of us, as individual human beings, are capable of spotting when we're being lied to and when a story is being spun, rather than a message that is coming from the heart and is genuine. And we can do that through media. We spot that, everybody spots that, and instinctively it goes, well, there's something wrong with that message. Whoa, hang on an unconscious level.
Yeah.
So the more we can detach and then look at what we are being presented with in our lives from that detached viewpoint, the better it's going to be for everybody, because that enables you to assess your own circumstance, your own energy, the way that you feel. And for heaven's sake, the most important thing for all of us actually is to simply communicate and be in touch with our own physical being through the breath primarily. And actually, you'll notice that I'm out of breath here because I'm not only sort of slightly anxious because we're doing this podcast, but also because actually I'm quite excited about what we're talking about. So physically, there's something going on here that I'm, think, I've got to, hang on, let me just breathe here,
Yeah.
And the breath is the key to everything. It's very simple. At the same time, it's actually quite difficult to get out of the habit of just being the rabbit in the headlights and running around like, an unguided missile.
Trying to be creative is a good way to help. I find, if I can find a way to be creative, making a video or getting out into the countryside and connecting with the land like I try to do, those are all things that help me. But your particular speciality, of course, is house healing. And it struck me that there might be some things that people can do with respect to their own homes and the energy in their homes that would maybe insulate or support them in some way.
The biggest thing that made the biggest difference in my life, right, was actually realizing that I could communicate with the subtle energies in my own home. Now, what I mean by that is that we're all surrounded by electromagnetic, geomagnetic fields of energy we know that the Earth is an electrical source. There's an electrical field that is, surrounds the Earth, and we have developed as a species to be part of that. And there are various layers and levels that are involved in that process, right? As us as humanity living within this electrical environment. Now, the thing is that when we start to look at this and use the labels of mysticism and earth mysteries and this sort of way of looking at life, which is really where I come from, we're talking about using these very ancient processes of communicating with these subtle energy fields, whether they be through personality or simply through the field that is present, as I say, that we live in, right? Now, dowsing is one way for us to do it. It's a very crude way of doing it, but we can access and see results of. I'll come back to how we do this in a second, but we can use dowsing to actually illustrate the way that our physical being is being held, and by us as an entity within this physical body, but also by the electrical field in which we live. Because the dowsing process, and I'll explain this in a second, because at the moment it's going to sound very bizarre. The dowsing process enables us to see symbolically a representation of us looking into the electrical field in which we live, right? Now, the electrical field in which we live is commonly known as earth energy, right? That's the dowser's term for it, and perhaps it's the other mystical workers' name for it as well. But it's a very broad category because it basically is, wherever it developed, wherever it started from, earth energy, it was a name for something that nobody understood what it was. But it's an electrical field, right? Now, within earth energy, there's all sorts of different layers, and we access the different layers basically through the use of our bodies, in determining what it is that we're searching for. So we're kind of going along the dial of a radio saying, do I want to tune into that? 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 And that is how you access the different layers within earth energy. And earth energy is absolutely everywhere. People have heard of ley lines, people have heard of earth energy lines, and I know you've been searching some, and we'll talk about those in a minute, I guess. But earth energy is basically absolutely everywhere. What you're finding when you find an earth energy line, or what some people call ley lines, is a concentrated amount of it, right? So a different peak of flow. Now, if you've got a set of dowsing rods are easier to use than a pendulum. So use a set of dowsing rods. You can make your own simple coat hanger, bend it right angles, one in each hand. You can ask to be shown the most powerful and positive earth energy center in your home. Now, when we say center, we're thinking vortex, spiral, okay? And you'll be shown, you can follow it. You follow the rods around your apartment or your house, and you'll come to a room and you'll find a lovely spiral, and you can douse that spiral. You just get your rods out and you tune into that, and there it is, and you follow it. Wonderful. Now, why is that important? Because it's important because this is the vital energy. This electrical field, this earth energy in which we live, is a vital energy. It's the life-giving energy in which we function. It is also the transport mechanism for information from other realms, right? Subtle realms. I'm not going to go into too much detail there. But basically, if you find that power center and you are chilled enough, in that meditative state sufficiently, you can ask for some very simple responses from that electrical field. And in a way, what you're doing is you're actually asking a response from the universe to your own presence. I mean, given that we are also part of the universe, it's the universe reflecting on itself. And what you can do is ask, the basic shapes that you'll find are the infinity symbol, the figure of 8. And you'll be shown one, right? You just follow it, you just ask for it, and you rod will point, and you find the end of it, and you follow it. And you'll see that figure of 8. And then calm, accept that is there. And then you can ask and be shown another one. You will be shown another one. It will sit at right angles to that first one. And if you're once you've got the practice of that and you believe in what you're finding, and that's one of the crucial things here, is because you can't make the progress along the path to finding this different way of seeing the world unless you trust and have faith that you are being shown something of significance, then you get to a stage where these lovely infinity symbols you actually find them pulsing, and they pulse with such regularity. It's a beautiful experience just to tune into this, and you feel it. You know, dowsing is not about watching what the rod does. Dowsing is about what you feel and where you go to within the inner universe that then is reflected out into that environment that you're immediately in. Now, why is that important? Well, that's important because that starts to build up your confidence, right? You know, and the more you meditate at that place, that power center that you found, because meditation is the absolutely fundamental key to all of this work. The more you meditate there, the more you are opening up the channels to these subtle realms. And these are the subtle realms that enable you to be influenced and therefore change your perspective on life. And not only that, to also experience life completely differently, because you're activating your ability and your power as a co-creative force to change this, because this is not fixed. This is completely malleable. Okay. This is not, you know, form, physical form is utterly malleable and changes moment by moment. We know that, right? So the more you meditate with these lovely infinity symbols, they're known officially as lemniscate. One is known as a lemniscate of Nui, named after the mathematician in the 17th century or something like that who discovered it. Anyway, the more you meditate with it, the more you get in tune with it, and the more you are then able to discover more and more sacred symbolism within it. And one of the most fascinating things that is there for you and waiting for you is to actually discover the Earth's response to you in this electrical field. And that is shown to you as a shape that will actually have 5 points to it, right? So we might call that a 5-pointed star, or we might call that a pentagram. And people, you know, as soon as you mention the word pentagram, people go, oh my God, you're working with the devil. No, we're not. What we're working with is actually something that's fundamental to humanity. That is our relationship to the physical earth on which we live and have been a part of and are a part of. When you first find that 5-pointed star, the chances are it won't be a lovely symmetrical 5-pointed star. It'll be a really stressed looking, bizarre shape that is nothing like a 5-pointed star. But the more you work on yourself, and this is not necessarily a long-term process, the more you work on yourself to actually find the peace and the truth of who you are, what you'll find is as you douse and continue to douse that 5-pointed star, it will actually change over days, weeks maybe, and become a super wonderful, symmetrical, geometric 5-pointed star. And what that says is you're in balance. Earth, air, fire, water, spirit, 5 points. Each of those are represented by one of those points.
Right.
And that is a very fundamental process, which actually, you know, the shamans of the world have been doing and have known about for eons. And what it does is actually allows you to connect with your true self, because you are simply of the earth.
Sounds exactly, you know, what I would expect. But these days, since we live in an era where science is very political, I read an article, for example, just the other day that made me kind of giggle, and it was about astrology, and it was in a serious periodical, and the author started out, you know, with this sort of paragraph about astrological predictions for the future and blah, blah, blah. And he wrote a paragraph and then one line. This is all good, of course, except astrology is nonsense. There's no science to support it. And I started to giggle, because I'm a PhD scientist. And if you study quantum physics, then the first thing you understand is there's plenty of science to support exactly that and much more. But for some reason, the vast majority of people in the mainstream want to portray this as, you know, sort of nonsense and gibberish and not worthy of anybody's attention. And I know that you've been talking and pursuing this direction in terms of quantum physics. So is there a chance that you can potentially explain what's going on, or attempt to, in a scientific way?
in 5 minutes. Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is what you're saying about science. I'll try, is the answer to that.
Yeah.
I'll try, but usually, I mean, when I try, then what it tends to sound like is what comes out is termed as pseudoscience, which of course again is one of the derogatory terms.
Yeah.
But dear old Rupert Sheldrake, I think you're aware of Rupert Sheldrake, but he's also, of course, got within the scientific community been quite ostracized because he has alternative beliefs. But he has a lovely term for the current way that science is being used, which is that it's scientism. So he's, most people that quote science and say, well, this is not scientific. Actually, that's just scientism. That's just people adopting a label that they don't actually understand and saying and using it to, try to ridicule some very fundamental beliefs. Right. So we'll try to avoid too much pseudoscience, but I can only use phrases that I sort of understand and the way that I assimilate the information and the way that I kind of translate it. The most important thing to me is how quantum science, over 100 years ago now, developed as the exploration of the absolutely tiny, the absolutely minute, so the exploration of the atomic structure of reality. So when we talk about quantum science, we're looking at energy packets that make up the atomic structures, that make up atoms, that make up molecules, that make up physical reality. Now, there is a wonderful physicist called Amit Goswami. He's an Indian chap, and he actually is fantastic. For any of your listeners who want to look into this creation of reality from a scientific point of view, as well as the mystical, Amit is a fantastic guy to look into, as well as your information, of course, Gary. It's not let me not sidetrack your audience to somebody else. But Amit, a 30 years PhD physicist, he's the real deal, you know what I mean, in terms of science. And he comes at everything from the non-material perspective. And this is really important because most science these days, and a lot of quantum mechanics, actually tries to look at the way that reality is formed from the point of view that the material world is the dominant and the precursor to any other aspect of consciousness. So in other words, what the materialists say is that consciousness arises from the molecules of matter. Okay. What the non-materialists say, such as Amit Goswami and yourself and me, is that actually the material world arises from consciousness. It is the non-material that creates the material. Okay, and that's fundamental, and that's really important difference to actually grasp and understand, because what all of quantum science it says, whether it's materialism or non-materialism, is that the quantum field that creates reality, it is there, that is the basic building block, is bubbling in and out of existence all the time. So the molecules that are created are made out of energy that appear and disappear all the time, and nobody knows where that energy comes from that creates the bubbling mass. Now, this is actually important because it means that the material world is being recreated constantly. It's not, materialists would say, well, there's the Earth, it's been there for billions of years, that's the Earth, that's it. But equally, they know, they know that the atomic structure that makes that mass of the Earth is constantly changing. The atomic structure does not stay still. You are not the same atomic structure that you were 20 years ago. There's not a single atom in you that is the same, right?
Yeah.
Now, the importance of that is that the really important thing about quantum mechanics is that the role of the observer in the process of the material world being formed. This is the fundamental thing. And this is where so much New Ageism has come from, is this idea that as an observer tries to measure the speed and position of a molecule, it changes into solid form from the potentiality of where it might be, right? Okay, that's not terribly well explained. Let's say we've got an electron of a hydrogen atom. That electron of the hydrogen atom is actually not as we're often led to believe, it's not like a solid billiard ball sitting there as an electron. Like, okay, there's this spherical object, but it's just very, very tiny, and it's whizzing around like mad. It doesn't exist like that. What it is it's just like a fluctuation within an overall energy field, a little, excitation within an energy field, and that as an observer tries to pinpoint where that excitation actually is, it appears to form into a position. So this is where the idea of possibility, you've got infinite possibility within this bubbling field of the quantum foam from which everything arises. It's an infinite possibility. The observer observes and collapses, as they say, something into form. And therefore, the idea is that actually that expands out into the macro environment that we can observe.
Yeah.
This is where the idea of we create our own reality, because the observer is taken to be the human individual. Now, where we are currently is that with science is that it's not necessarily the human observation. There are various theories about, well, actually an observer might be even just a sound, background sound resonating throughout the universe that actually is forming this kind of observation in some manner. That's rather difficult to get your head around. But the important thing is that there is still a role for the human observation within every interaction, but there is also a role for wider observation within that interaction. And what we're looking at there is the idea that there is a God's eye view. So there are other observing forces upon each and every interaction. So there is an observation that is happening elsewhere to us now, having this conversation. And we are also observing in our own human terms. And there are other observations probably that go from our macro level down into the minutest thing that actually forms, and then kind of in this paradoxical way, it all happens at once in the eternal loop of time, that the observation creates the moment. So
doing good.
It's pretty brain bending. But what's lovely is that non-materialist science accept that there is a God's eye view, right? And that's really important, because it means that we, as the individual, yes, we have a role in our created reality, which means that we can experience and learn from our life, because that's what our reality is. It's our 80 years of living as a human, as one identified human being, which again is simply an excitation within the overall universal quantum energy field. And when that excitation ceases to be providing feedback to the overall universe, then it changes form and has a different life. Okay, that's the way I would look at it. We have power over what we experience, but more importantly, we're also being shown moment by moment through this process that I just described of different observational points and like Russian dolls observation points, if you like. We're there somewhere towards the little one, but there are wider observations there. we have power, we also have the opportunity to learn. And it's from the learning, when we are consciously aware of what we are being shown within our lives, when we choose to change our reaction to what we're being shown, then we are choosing to live intentionally and mindfully. And all of those Russian doll kind of other observation points change in resonance with our choices and the choices of the observers as well. So the whole, the new physics, if you like, that is currently really taking hold quite, big time, I would say, is based upon the quantum field basically being a field that works from the principle of resonance. And the importance for us as individuals, which really comes back to answering your first question that you posed to me, is what can people do to help ease stress in life, is to actually be still, be heart focused, because this is the implement, this is the tool, the heart is the tool that influences the resonance of the field that you create in. So when we live from the heart and live in that energy of compassion, forgiveness, love, then that is what is echoed around us. But at the moment, generally for society, for humanity, most people are not living in that resonance, or that level of resonance. And that's okay. This is not a judgment. And non-judgmental behavior is also a part of that living from the heart, because we are human, and we are resonating as human beings. And the nature of human beings is to be incredibly fallible. But what we also have is an extreme range of choices emotionally, from doing some really, really good stuff to doing some really, really evil stuff. And that applies to each and every one of us. Hence the whole basis of so many spiritual traditions around the world throughout the eons, simply based on that principle of harmony and balance.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually nothing new that you just said that hasn't been around in various esoteric and religious systems since before memories began. It's just that we seem to, generation to generation, have to relearn and re-experience. And I get the impression at times that there are forces around that are trying to stop people from realizing their own potential. And I think that this whole fear-causing environment that we've always had in our lives, but increasingly over the last couple of years, is aimed at stopping people from finding themselves and finding their place in the universe and connecting with the energies that really are them and sustain them. And to that end, I think the work that you're doing is incredibly important, because you're reaching people and opening their eyes. I mean, even the quantum physics stuff, I thought you explained it very well. You probably know a little while ago, 10 years or so ago, I wrote a book called The Last Observer, a little cheesy novel. But that was trying to put quantum physics and magic in the same bucket and show, in a similar way, that in fact, a lot of stuff that we call magic can be explained in proper scientific way. And a lot of the stuff that people like Einstein and some of these famous physicists have come up with and expressed in very strange language to the outsider from physics have actually been known about by mystics and religious people for centuries, so millennia, in fact.
Absolutely. And you can't also rule out the fact that a lot of those leading scientists, especially people like David Bohm, for example, were very spiritual people. And this is where they got their inspiration. They were not, anyway, but it's a choice that they made, whether they were materialists or non-materialists. But, science has been diverted into the materialistic world, but that's changing, and that's part of the point. The thing that I would say is that the overriding forces that as you say, that are seeming to steer the message into one of suppression and constriction of the masses. This is, we're talking about original sin here, really, if we look at it in religious terms, because we're looking at good and evil, and that's all there is to it, right? So, but good and evil are archetypes, and within those archetypes, there are all sorts of subdivisions and things like this. And this is another aspect that you can look at. You can look at these energy fields as archetypal energy fields, and they are an expression that we can be associated with. So we can, we talked just now about living from the heart, and heart-based living, learning to love. I'm not sure how it would be described in a tarot pack, for example, as the lover, isn't it? Yeah. So it's an archetype. It's an archetype. It's an archetypal path for life. If one is no, I don't want to use the word destined. I don't like the idea of destiny. I think destiny is only something that we look at in retrospect. But if one is following a path that is heart-based, then one is following and trying to fulfill the aspects of that archetype, okay? And what that inevitably means is that you're coming up against things that create friction, because this 3D world that we inhabit has friction within all aspects of its creation. So there's friction between people, there's friction on vehicles running on our road. Friction is integral, and this good and evil is part of that friction creation device. So it ain't ever going to go away. But the role is for us, as you just alluded to, basically, is to, through mindfulness and understanding your own role within the whole picture, is to decide where you choose to accept friction and where you learn from friction, or where you decide, well, actually, that friction is not applicable to me anymore. And therefore, life changes as you make those inner choices.
Yeah, the tarot card analogy is the devil. I think is the devil and the lovers, and if you look at those two cards, particularly in the Rider-Waite deck, they're very similar actually.
Right.
They have a male, a female, and some kind of alter ego spirit thing behind. In the lovers, I think it's an angel, and in the devil card, it's the old devil himself, right? And the thing that I was say is, when you look at the lovers card, you've got the man looking at the woman, looking at the angel, and everything's in harmony and communication. When you look at the devil card, they're seemingly tied, but there's actually, there's no locks. They could just untie themselves very easily and walk away, and they're all not looking at each other. So one just shows disharmony, and the other one shows harmony, inner and outer. And I think they're great. So, if you're talking about meditation, I think those two tarot cards are really great to meditate on, because it becomes very clear that whatever prison we put ourselves in, we put ourselves in it, and we can escape from it just with an attitude of mind and a change in the way we view things.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really, you mentioned earlier on that fundamentally what I do, quote unquote, is work as a house healer. But that we work on the space of a house, but what we're really doing is working on the energy of the person, because we accept and acknowledge that the person is living in either a house that is suited to them or not. And what I mean by that is their choices have brought them to a place. And by working on the subtle energies of the person and their place, then what we do is enable these other wider observers to have to change their emphasis on that person. And also we accept that actually that person coming to us for help, it has made a choice to change, right? Because nothing, we're not going to go off. We don't go, picking out, oh, do you want your house healed? Let me come and do some work, randomly. But clearly, people come to us because they need help, and they feel that there's something wrong. I don't quite fit into my house. I don't know what it is. I quite like living here, but it does feel bloody odd. That's a classic case. That's actually what was said to me just a couple of days ago by a lady I'm talking to. And so she is at the point of change. She's recognized that things need to change. And what we do as house healers is work with that person on all sorts of different levels. It's not just about kind of the actual act of healing, which is basically introducing these wider observant points, I mean, the universe effectively, or God, whatever you want to use, into that person's life to enable a change. Some of that happens, and in that sense, there's kind of an aspect of magic, if you like, from your perspective. That kind of use of subtle energies, but nothing is done out of alignment with the divine, and nothing is done out of alignment with what that person wants. But it's a fascinating thing, because the amount of times that we do get people saying, well, yes, the house, I don't know what you've done, but the house feels completely different. And that actually enables them to change their choices. And that's what it's really all about. It's all about choice. It's fantastic. It's fascinating. I mean, we could have a whole conversation about whether free will exists or not, but that's what goes today.
Yeah. Interesting. And in terms of what you're up to from a house healing perspective, are you involved in any new initiatives or anything that's relevant?
Yeah. I mean, I sometimes wonder why I don't seem to have a lot of time. But basically, I'm developing a house healing training process, I guess. I put through a few groups through the process. I've got one running at the moment. And it is to help people understand the house healing process, how it can help other people, move to a better state of well-being. And I get a lot of practitioners of other well-being therapies, so feng shui therapists or even interior designers. Actually, it's really interesting when you get somebody that has like got really bored with what they're doing on interior design wise. And they think, well, it must be, they've somehow thought, well, there must be more to life. This is a bit odd. And then they start to come on the spiritual path. And this house healing per se is fundamentally a spiritual aspect, a spiritual way of looking at life and introducing these wider energy fields into a person's life. And that's really exciting, because it's lovely to see people develop and flourish. And, I'm on the third formal group through the process. And at least one person in every group so far has said, this is life changing. And that's what I want to hear, is because it means that they've completely shifted their perspective and their world literally has changed. So I rather randomly set a goal when I started this to have 100 house healers in 5 years, having gone through the training. I can see that that's a bit of a big ask, but I'm going to stick to that and try and work on it. But I only take small groups. I do them 6 or 8 at a time, because it really is a self-development process. Because as we've talked about today, in order to affect change outside, you need to be affecting change inside, and therefore it is a deep work.
That's the
that's the latest.
As above, so below.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. It's these fundamental sort of spiritual platitudes, but then you start to say, well, yeah, I can see why they've developed. It's just a shame that they become platitudes in a way.
Yeah, well, I do know though that you need to constantly find ways. Well, at least I do. I need to find no matter what I do, I need to find ways to constantly bring myself back to a different state of mind, because the world has a really good way of pulling me back to where I don't want to be. And it does it so subtly that you don't know until one day you wake up and you think, hang on a minute, I'm back where I started. I've got to go all through this again now. How did I get here?
But it's not quite that bad, I don't think, Gary. I think you slightly painted a picture that sort of suggests that you're climbing out of a well or something, and you just keep sliding right back to the bottom. I think I would be brave enough to say to you, Gary, that actually you are experiencing different ways. You're looking at the same thing from different points of view in different stages of your life, and that's great, because that's what you're doing. I don't think there's no way you slide back to the beginning, but I do know the beginning. But I do know exactly what you mean by the fact that life, human being life as a human being is, it seems, designed to keep you locked into place. Briefly, if we think about this though, that makes perfect sense that would be the case, that this dimension is designed to keep things in specific state of energy, because it's a physical dimension. It depends upon the forces of keeping atoms together in their resonance, to remain in form. This pen has to stay as a pen, because otherwise I'm not going to know where it is. So there are forces keeping that as a pen. There are forces keeping me as a physical being, but there are equally forces operating on my psyche, on my essence. Even if we accept that, as I do, this is the fundamental of the way that I look at life, and as you will, that you are a spiritual being inhabiting your biocontainment suit. That's your body, right?
Yeah.
So there's you, and there's your biocontainment suit. And fundamentally, if we're working in health and harmony, then we are relying on our biocontainment suit to be working perfectly well. And we can carry on doing and learning all this sort of stuff, but we're doing that in harmony with the body. And actually, it is very much harmony, because spirituality is not about rejecting this. It's about harmonizing and integrating this into that. Okay, because that resonance probably, I'm making an assumption here, resonates through into other dimensions, but that's the purpose of this physical dimension, I would say. So coming right back to your first one, how do you get into peace, balance, and harmony and remain removed from the stress of daily life? Step back and you become aware that you're the spiritual being within, and all of this other playtime is just laughable. So enjoy it, and enjoy what you want to enjoy from life, but don't get hooked on the stuff that you're being fed when it's not for you.
It's a great summary. I would just maybe add one thing to it, that I've discovered that when you are in the right place, strange things happen. Synchronicities happen all the time. And when you're not in the right place, those synchronicities don't occur with the same frequency. So you can actually measure, to some extent, where you are with respect to where you want to be, if that makes sense, just by thinking about the synchronicities in your life.
Absolutely. And also recognizing that the one thing you don't ever get shown is what would have happened if you hadn't been in that resonance, in that flow, right?
Yeah.
So the ability to do that observation that you've just talked about is actually quite difficult, because we forget. We don't get an option. We don't get the, well, if I make this choice, oh yes, I've had that experience. We don't get the, oh, I did that experience. We don't get the backup, right? Do we? We just have the one experience, which is like, well, this is either crap or it's going really well, and the synchronicities are flowing. And that's that's absolutely right. That's what you want to aim for. And then you can really step off that and really take the plunge.
Great stuff. So just maybe finish up with where we can find you if people are interested in the course or some of the other things you're doing. Yeah,
the house healing course in particular, if anyone's interested in that, just look out for the website www.knightsrose.com. That's KNIGHTSROSE.com. Or people can find me on YouTube, which is where a lot of people find me. So literally just go to YouTube and put in Tim Walter, WALTER, Tim Walter House Healer, or Tim Walter Dowser. If you don't put in the House Healer or Dowser, you'll get some kind of German footballer, and that's not me. So
yeah, I found him too.
He's got a lot bigger fan base than I have to say. But yeah, no, but seriously, yeah, that's where I am. So there's loads of stuff on YouTube for people to dig out and enjoy anyway. So yeah.